Most people think silence is empty, but for me, silence is layered, like the dust on a bookshelf. It tells you what hasn't been touched, who hasn't been around, what's been forgotten. That's what I was thinking as I stood at the edge of the garden that morning. The same garden I had trimmed and raked and fertilized for 16 years. It was the only part of the house my late wife had claimed as hers, and the only part I never let anyone else ruin. But that morning, I wasn't the one choosing the flowers. They were. My daughter Lindsay's wedding was being hosted in my backyard. Not because she asked me, not because I offered, because her fiancé's family decided it was quaint. They'd visited once, took a few photos, then declared it would be just perfect with the right lighting and crew. They never asked if I'd be part of it, and they didn't need to, because by that point, I was already background. They moved through the house like decorators in a museum, measuring walls, discussing chandeliers, bringing in portable mirrors and ghost chairs and imported candles from somewhere I couldn't pronounce. They never told me I was excluded, but they never included me either, and that tells you everything you need to know. I heard them talking through the open window one afternoon. "Walter's still around?" one of them asked, probably the groom's sister. "Yeah, but he just stays in his study, quiet, harmless." They were right about one thing. I was quiet, but not harmless. Lindsay hadn't been cruel. She hadn't told me to stay away, but she didn't assign me a seat at the rehearsal dinner. She didn't ask me to give a toast. And when the photographer came by to sketch out the angles and backdrops, I was in the kitchen fixing the faucet. He looked at me and said, "Excuse me, sir, can we move this ladder out of the frame?" I wasn't the ladder's owner. I was the ladder. They didn't want me in the photos. Too old, too plain. Didn't match the neutral aesthetic. Even Lindsay flinched when the makeup artist asked, "Are your parents both attending?" She smiled, touched her bracelet, and said, "Just my mom, in spirit." I understood. Dead mothers get praised. Living fathers get painted out of the frame. I stayed quiet. I wasn't here to embarrass her. I'd raised her to be independent, strong, capable. But I hadn't raised her to be dismissive. That part, she picked up from the man she was marrying. The kind of man who shook hands too hard and smiled too wide, and never remembered my first name. The day before the wedding, they did a trial run of the family photo lineup. I watched from the porch. They brought out stools for grandparents, benches for the siblings, and then a second photographer to handle the editorial shots. I walked over gently. The planner looked confused. "Oh, are you with catering?" Lindsay didn't correct her. She just said, "Dad, we're kind of in the middle of a tight schedule." That was it. No rage, no yelling, just reality. I stepped back, watched them take a dozen photos without me. I didn't belong in their frame. But I wasn't broken, because I had just met someone a few hours earlier who did see me, and she held a camera too. Her name was Maren Holt, freelance photographer, late 30s, dressed like comfort mattered more than impression. No high heels, no clipped lanyards, just black boots, a button-down shirt rolled to the elbows, and a camera that looked older than she was. She was one of two photographers hired by the groom's family. The other one, all smiles and gloss, had already asked for where the power outlets were and whether a drone pass was permitted. Maren, though, had her camera around her neck and a quiet focus I recognized. Not the kind that scans for attention, the kind that waits for moments. She noticed me long before I noticed her. While the others were setting up tripods and running cables, Maren was walking the edge of the property, camera in hand, eyes curious but respectful. She paused near the rose arch Evelyn planted 12 years ago, the one I still trimmed by hand. "Who did the lattice work?" she asked softly. I looked up from my pruning. "My wife, back when her knees still cooperated." Maren smiled. "It's perfect symmetry. Rare to see that in private gardens." I gave a small nod. She hated things that leaned. Most people would have said, "Sorry for your loss." Maren didn't. She just stepped back, snapped a photo of the arch and said, "She'd be proud you've kept it alive." That's when I first looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't just clicking photos, she was collecting meaning. Later I saw her reviewing the photo list near the barn. A long spreadsheet, names, pairings, angles, lighting notes. The bride's side was color-coded. The groom's side had 3 assistants. I wasn't on it, not even in the extended family section. Maren looked up as I hovered nearby. "No slot for you. Apparently I don't go with beige." She tilted her head. "That your call or theirs?" I shrugged. "I think I blend in too well with the bricks." She smirked. Or maybe you're the only part that's not painted. That night, after everyone left, she walked by again, camera tucked away. I was sitting on the porch, sipping cold tea, and listening to crickets. "You okay with all this?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, "You ever see someone frame a picture so carefully they forget what the picture's actually about?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, all the time." I don't know what made me say it, but I asked, "You freelance?" She smiled. "Always. You own your work, every shutter." I tapped the rim of my glass. "Good. Why? Because there might be a better story here than the one they're trying to stage." She tilted her head. "You want me to tell your version?" "No," I said calmly. "I want you to capture the truth, quietly. No poses, no filters." Marin looked out over the lawn, where folding chairs waited to be arranged in perfect rows. Then she said, "Okay." And in that moment something shifted. I was no longer invisible. I was framing something of my own. The morning of the wedding came with too many moving parts. Trucks unloading gold-trimmed dinnerware, a florist arguing about flower arrangements, the wedding planner walking around with a clipboard like she was defusing bombs, and I stayed invisible. That was their plan anyway. But Marin had started doing something different. She took photos when they weren't looking. Not the posed kind. Not the fake laughter under soft lighting. She caught moments in between. The bride adjusting her bracelet while no one was watching. The groom checking his teeth in a spoon. The planner mouthing curses into her headset. And occasionally, she'd take one of me. Quiet ones. Of me brushing the gravel near the chairs. Of me adjusting Evelyn's rose arch. One last time. Of me alone watching from the porch, the man they cropped out. I never asked her to. She never said why, but the way she moved, the way she saw, she was making something real. And that terrified them. By noon, the Davenports, the groom's family, were in full performance mode. Suits fitted tighter than egos. Champagne flutes filled before noon. Laughter loud enough to cover guilt. They posed for photos like they'd been rehearsing it for years. Hands on shoulders, eyes slightly off-center. Toned smiles, ready for filters. I watched it all, and I saw Lindsay among them. My daughter. She looked beautiful, no doubt. But she didn't look like herself. Not the little girl who used to wear grass-stained overalls and sing in the back seat. Not the college graduate who wore her mother's pendant under her gown. This woman wore layers that didn't belong to her. Silk, jewelry, hesitation. I caught her glancing toward me once. Just once. From behind her veil as the planner pulled her away. She didn't wave, but she didn't look through me either. That was something. During the official family portraits, I stayed seated by the tool shed. I could see everything from there. The Davenport patriarch stood front and center, like he'd paid for the spotlight. Lindsay stood next to her future mother-in-law, who kept adjusting her posture. And I sipped lukewarm coffee from a thermos. Then I noticed Marin shift positions. She wasn't facing them anymore. She had turned slightly, capturing them from the side. I could see it in her face. She was getting more than they wanted her to. She was documenting, not just photographing. Afterward, she approached me again. "I got something," she said. "Something good? Something true." She sat next to me, camera resting on her lap. "They think these photos will last forever," she said. "But they don't realize the parts they leave out are the ones people remember." I nodded. She leaned closer. "You sure you don't want me to step in more directly?" I shook my head. "I don't want revenge, Marin. I want perspective." She smiled faintly. "That's rarer than people think." We sat there silent for a while. The sun hit the rose arch just right, and I realized something. They had cropped me out of the photo, but they'd left me with the frame, and the frame holds everything. The ceremony started late. Not because of me, because the Davenport matriarch decided her dress didn't feel regal enough, and made them steam another one. The guests, 142 of them, sipped champagne under umbrellas, while the planner whispered apologies into her earpiece and signaled at the sky like she could control weather apps by hand. From my spot on the porch, I could see the whole stage. It didn't look like a wedding. It looked like a press release. Marin didn't join the chaos. She stood behind a small shrub line. Not hidden, just out of their line of sight. She used a silent shutter setting and a fixed lens. She wasn't trying to capture the moment. She was waiting for it to reveal itself. Lindsay walked down the aisle with a man she barely knew. A friend of the groom's family, some financial advisor from Connecticut. They said it was more balanced that way. Said I wouldn't match the symmetry. No one told me until the night before. I didn't argue. I'd already been erased. But Marin? She pointed her camera at me just then. Not at the aisle. She caught me watching. Not crying. Not smiling. Just witnessing. They exchanged vows written by someone else. I could tell. There was no soul in them. Just curated metaphors and empty promises tied with a satin bow. The officiant asked the guests to hold their joy until the final declaration, as if anyone was waiting to cheer. When the kiss came, it felt like a sigh, not a spark, and yet the guests clapped. The camera crew hovered, and the Davenports applauded like a business merger had just closed. I stayed seated. The planner glanced over, clearly unsure if I was still part of the optics. Someone nudged her. She waved it off. I was out of frame. Again. During the reception, while the DJ played acoustic versions of 90s hits no one requested, I wandered near the catering tents. There, leaning on a crate of glassware, was Marin. She had a different camera slung over her shoulder now, not the one they paid her to use. I raised an eyebrow. She grinned. They only paid me for the digital shots. And this? I asked, tapping the old school camera. This is for the truth. She pulled out a few test prints from her messenger bag. Black and white. No edits. One showed Lindsay in a moment between poses. Eyes down. Bouquet tilted. Veil slipping slightly. It was the first picture I'd seen in years where she looked like herself. Keep it, Marin said, handing it over. What about your set? They'll get their versions. And me? You'll get the one that tells the whole story. That night, I returned to my study. The house was quieter than usual. Most of the guests were still outside, buzzing under fairy lights and sipping expensive lies. I sat by the window, photo in hand, and for the first time since this circus started, I felt seen. 3 days after the wedding, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name in clean, deliberate handwriting. Inside, a stack of 4x6 prints, black and white, unfiltered. And every single one told a version of the truth the Davenports would never want printed. One showed the groom glancing at his watch during the vows. Another, the mother-in-law scowling at the floral arch Evelyn built with her own hands. But the one that stopped me cold? A single frame. Lindsay, standing alone after the ceremony, no veil, no bouquet, just her, eyes off camera, tired. Like a curtain had dropped and she was realizing there was no encore. Marin had printed them. That much I knew. No watermark, no signature, just raw evidence. Real moments. I didn't call her. Didn't need to. But I placed the photos carefully inside an old leather-bound book Evelyn used to keep her pressed flowers in. Because these weren't memories. They were reminders. Later that week, a small envelope arrived for Lindsay. I didn't ask, but I saw the corner of it sticking out of her bag when she stopped by to collect some boxes. She looked pale, worn down, like the glitter of the perfect day had scratched her skin instead of adorning it. You okay? I asked, careful not to press. She nodded too quickly. I'm fine, just tired. Married life? She hesitated. Then quietly, more like married image. She didn't say more, but I saw the way her fingers lingered on the doorknob before leaving, like she wasn't sure which side of the door she belonged to anymore. That night, I received a text. Unknown number, but the message was clear. The photos weren't what we paid for. She had no right. It wasn't signed. Didn't have to be. I stared at it for a long time, then typed one word back. Exactly. A week later, the official wedding photos were posted online. You know the kind. Warm tones. Smiling faces. Synchronized dresses. Perfect exposure. Not a single photo included me. Not one. But in the local gallery downtown, a place most of those guests would never think to visit, there was a new exhibit going up. The Honest Frame, by Marin Holt. One wall was dedicated to a section called Uninvited Presents, and on that wall, a portrait of me, standing under Evelyn's rose arch. Not posing, just existing. And in that frame, you could see everything they tried to leave out. I didn't tell anyone about the exhibit, didn't invite Lindsay, didn't make a speech. I just visited once a week. Sat on the bench across from the print, listened to strangers walk by and say things like, there's something powerful about this one. Feels like a story we're not being told, but should be. I didn't correct them, didn't say a word. Some truths don't need narration. Marin never advertised the exhibit. No banners, no social media countdown. Just a quiet Thursday opening in a brick front building with one flickering light over the doorway. Yet somehow people came, not the Davenports, not the Instagram couples, but the kind of people who understood the weight of a candid glance. Teachers, artists, janitors, widows. They stood in front of those unpolished frames longer than they did the glossy wedding portfolios on the other wall. They weren't looking for beauty. They were looking for truth. I visited again the following Sunday. Same bench, same silence. Only this time a boy, maybe 10 or 11, stood in front of my portrait. He kept tilting his head, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His mother leaned down and whispered, "That's someone who was left out, sweetie." He nodded, then asked, "Why would they do that?" She hesitated, then said, "Some people forget who built the house they're standing in." I sat a little taller on the bench after that, not out of pride, but because someone else saw what Lindsay had missed, what the Davenports had scrubbed from the frame. Later that evening I heard from Marin, a single voicemail. They threatened to sue, said I broke a contract clause. I offered to return the check and remove the prints, but then I read the clause again and realized the contract was with their media team, not me. She chuckled softly. Looks like being freelance comes in handy after all. She kept the exhibit up, didn't remove a single frame. And the gallery owner? He doubled the length of the showing after a local journalist ran a feature in the paper titled, "The Story Behind the Smiles. One photographer's look at what's left outside the frame." I clipped that article and placed it in the same flower book where Evelyn's pressed lilac still rested. There was something poetic about that. How dried petals and fading ink carried more truth than silk gowns and champagne speeches ever could. One afternoon, Lindsay showed up again, this time without a box, just herself. She walked into the kitchen without a word, poured a glass of water and stared out the window. The garden was in full bloom, the arch still standing. Evelyn would have been proud. "Can I ask you something?" she finally said. "Of course. Did you know she was taking those pictures?" "Marin." She nodded. I set down my mug. I knew she was watching, but I didn't know she'd see. Lindsay looked at me for a long moment. I saw the exhibit. My heart skipped, just once. "Did you like it?" She hesitated. Then I didn't recognize myself in half the photos. "That's not a bad thing." She blinked. "Why?" "Because maybe for the first time someone showed you what was behind the dress." She sat down at the table, no more rings on her hand, her eyes softer, tired, but honest. "I'm not sure I like who I was in those pictures." I nodded gently. "That means you're growing." We sat in silence after that. No accusations, no apologies, just the sound of the old clock ticking above the pantry, the same one Evelyn wound every Sunday after church. Some things survive neglect. Others bloom in spite of it. A week after Lindsay visited, I got an invitation in the mail. Not a wedding, not a birthday, just a small ivory card with embossed letters that read "Private Viewing, Final Night, The Honest Frame," featuring work by Marin Holt. No RSVP required. No +1, just a quiet welcome back. I wasn't sure if I'd go. Part of me felt like the story had already ended. I'd seen the photos, heard the whispers, felt the shift in Lindsay's voice. But that card sat on my desk for 2 days. Every time I passed it, it felt heavier. Not like paper, like unfinished business. On the night of the showing, I put on my best shirt, the one Evelyn said made me look less grumpy and more deliberate, and drove down to the gallery. It was fuller than usual. People in pairs, holding wine glasses, murmuring in front of frames like they were looking at clues, not images. And in the far back, illuminated by a single spotlight, was a new piece. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't black and white. It wasn't posed. And it wasn't just me. It was a wide shot. Evelyn's garden in bloom. The arch wrapped in soft yellow light. Lindsay in her wedding dress, barefoot, veil off, walking through the grass. And me? I was in the foreground, back turned, watering a flower bed. The title card underneath simply read, "What They Missed." I stared at it for a long time, not because I liked how I looked, but because it wasn't about me. It was about everything they left out, everything she almost forgot. Behind me someone cleared their throat. I turned to find Lindsay, hair pulled back, simple dress, no makeup, just herself. "You came," she said. "I did." She gestured to the photo. "You don't even see your face in this. Don't need to." She smiled, faintly. "Still feels like your picture." I nodded. "Because for once, the frame fits." She looked down at her hands. I moved out. I said nothing. "I'm staying at a friend's for now." just trying to breathe. Still I waited, then she added, "I want to fix things, not for a photo, for real." That was the first time in a long while I reached out and took her hand. Not because she needed it, but because I did. We stood there together, silently in front of that frame. Two people the wedding didn't want, finally seen, finally centered. As we turned to leave, Marin passed by. No big wave, no speech, just a nod, a shared understanding. Her work wasn't revenge, it was truth. And sometimes, truth is the deepest kind of justice. The exhibit closed that Sunday. By Monday morning, every frame was taken down, wrapped, and packed away. But something lingered, not just in the gallery, in the town. People had seen the truth, and the truth had ripples. By Thursday, someone forwarded me an article from a wedding blog, the kind Lindsay used to bookmark like scripture. The headline read, "When the photos reveal what the bride couldn't see." It wasn't written by Marin. It wasn't about her either. It was anonymous. But it quoted someone, a bride, who said, "I thought my wedding was a fairy tale. But I looked at the photos and realized I'd become a background character in someone else's show." The photo accompanying the article, Evelyn's arch, shot in soft light, no people, just presence. I didn't know if Lindsay had written it. I didn't ask. Some things matter more when left unsaid. Later that week I got a knock at the door. Not a text, not a call, an actual knock. When I opened it, the Davenport patriarch stood on my porch, still in a blazer, no tie. His smile looked like it had been applied with glue. "Mr. Grayson," he began. I wanted to clear the air. I leaned on the door frame. "You mean now that the wedding's over and the narrative slipped?" His nostrils flared slightly. "Let's be honest. You undermined the presentation. You encouraged the photographer to twist the tone." I didn't answer. He stepped forward slightly. "My son's been a wreck. My daughter-in-law's disappeared from social media. That exhibit wasn't fair." I stared at him, then spoke quietly. "You built a performance on someone else's land, and now you're surprised the foundation didn't hold." He opened his mouth, closed it, and I shut the door, softly. No yelling, no scene, just closure. A week passed, then another. Lindsay came by again, this time with an idea. "I want to put the arch back the way it was." I looked up from the newspaper. "It's still there." She shook her head. "I mean really back. Like Mom had it." She pulled out a small folded piece of paper. A sketch, her mother's original drawing. Arch, flower placements, base layout. "I found it in her old books," she said. "Thought maybe we could rebuild." And so we did. Not quickly, not perfectly, but together. She held the boards while I drilled. I handed her the clippers when she trimmed the stems. And one evening, just before sunset, we stepped back and looked at it. The same arch, same frame. But this time, we were in it. Marin sent one last envelope. Inside, one photo. Just me and Lindsay standing on either side of the arch, tools in hand, dirt on our clothes. No makeup, no filters, just two people who finally saw each other again. She'd labeled it, the negative that developed later. That photo's not in any gallery. It's not online. It hangs in my hallway, right where Evelyn's quilt used to be. Because it's not about who watches, it's about who remembers. Autumn came quickly that year. The leaves burned gold and red, and Evelyn's rose arch stood like a monument in the middle of it all, no longer a wedding prop but a symbol of something deeper. Restoration, reconnection, unspoken healing. Lindsay started coming by every Sunday afternoon, no formal schedule. She just appeared. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with questions, sometimes just to sit with me on the porch. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It had become familiar, comfortable, real. One Sunday she brought a brown folder and placed it gently on the table. "What's this?" I asked. "My divorce papers." I looked up. She smiled. But not with sadness. With all the flash gone, there wasn't much left. I nodded. She poured herself coffee like she'd done 100 times before. But this time she stayed for dinner. Later that evening, as we cleared the plates, she paused and asked, "Did you ever feel like you failed me?" I froze. Not because I hadn't asked myself that question 1,000 times, but because I never expected her to. I set the dish down. "No," I said softly, "but I feared I let you forget who you were." She swallowed. "I did forget." I shook my head. "You remembered just in time." That night I walked out to the garden. Marin had sent one last package days earlier, but I hadn't opened it. Now under the porch light I did. Inside, a hardcover book. No title on the front, but when I opened it, the first page said "The Frames They Missed," unpublished prints by Marin Holt. Dedicated to Walter Grayson for showing me that what's left out is often what matters most. The photos inside weren't just of the wedding, they were of Lindsay and me rebuilding the arch, of the roses coming back to life, of her picking weeds in her sundress, of me handing her a mug of tea with one hand, hammer in the other. There were no guests, no bouquets, no champagne, just the two of us doing what families do after the damage fades, rebuilding without a spotlight. The final photo, a full shot of the house, viewed from the street, curtains open, lights warm, no faces, but in the window a reflection of the rose arch just barely visible. She'd titled it, "Home Isn't a Venue." I placed the book on the mantle, not for show, not to impress anyone, but because sometimes the most powerful stories don't need narration or noise, they just need to be kept. Lindsay came by a week later with a new folder. "I've decided to open a small gallery," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "You? The gallery type?" She smiled. "Not for weddings. For stories." She hesitated, then added, "And I want you to help curate it." I laughed, not at her but with her. "You want me to pick photos?" "No," she said. "I want you to teach people how to see the ones they almost missed." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't see the bride, or the mistake. I saw my daughter, exactly as she was, and this time, the frame was full. The gallery opened in spring. Nothing fancy, no champagne tower, no influencer wall, no branded hashtag, just a converted storefront with wooden floors, soft lights, and a brass bell above the door that rang every time someone stepped inside. Lindsay named it The Quiet Frame. She said it was for people who'd ever felt left out of the picture. She invited Marin to showcase her work on the first wall. Marin declined the spotlight but sent in a new piece. It was the last photo she ever took at our house. The one of me and Lindsay standing in front of the rebuilt rose arch, smiling, sun behind us, no makeup, no pretense. Under it she had written, "He was never out of the frame. They just didn't know how to look." On opening day, a steady stream of visitors wandered through. Young couples, retired teachers, a veteran in full dress blues, even a mother pushing a stroller, wiping her eyes as she stared at a print of an empty chair beside a birthday cake. No one talked loudly. They didn't have to. The photos did the speaking. Near the end of the gallery, Lindsay had placed a guest book. One page caught my eye. A woman had written, "My father died thinking I didn't see him. This reminded me I did. I just didn't say it loud enough. Thank you." Later that week, Lindsay asked if I'd speak at a small panel she was hosting for the gallery's donors. I chuckled. What would I say? She smiled. Just tell them the story behind the arch. I stood behind a simple podium that Thursday. Small crowd, maybe 25 people. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I looked out and saw faces leaning in. Not for drama, for meaning. I told them about Evelyn and her garden. About the day I realized I was no longer part of the picture, but still part of the story. About Marin and her gift. About Lindsay, and how real restoration doesn't come with applause, but with quiet moments of choosing each other again. No one clapped loudly at the end, but they lingered. They waited, and one by one they came up. They didn't say, "Great speech." They said things like, "That reminded me of my grandfather. I wish I had said more before he passed. You helped me remember what I thought I'd forgotten." On the ride home, Lindsay was quiet. Then she said, "You always knew how to show up without making noise." I looked out the window. Not always. Just learned the hard way that presence means more than performance. She reached over and grabbed my hand. Warm, steady, honest. Back at the house, she stayed for dinner again. We laughed about small things. We cried about Evelyn, the good kind of cry. And later, as we stood under the porch light, Lindsay looked at me and said, "I'm going to frame one of those photos for the shop. Not one of the pretty ones. One of you working on the arch." Why that one? Because it reminds me that beauty is built, not bought. She hugged me before she left. A real hug, not the kind meant for photographers. The kind that leaves a mark. After she left, I sat alone for a while. The house didn't feel empty. It felt whole. And for the first time since Evelyn passed, I realized something. The shutter never truly closes. Not when the story still develops. Not when the frame finally fits. There's something different about people who learn from silence. They don't talk just to fill space. They listen between words, and when they create for the soul, not the spectacle. That's what Lindsay had become. The gallery was no longer just a tribute to one story. She'd expanded it, slowly with intention. She started collecting submissions from people around the country. Photos with handwritten notes, unseen moments, the kind you don't post, but you feel. She called the new section, "The Frames You Almost Missed." One day she showed me a letter. It was written in a shaky hand. "I saw the photo of you and your father by the arch. I never had that, but I imagined I did, and that alone made me forgive my past." Lindsay folded it slowly, then placed it in a box she called "Kept Things." She didn't display every story. Some she just carried. And that, to me, was more powerful than any exhibit. I helped her repaint the back room of the gallery, not because she asked, because I wanted to leave something behind, something more than advice or inheritance. The back wall now holds a mural. Simple. An outline of the Rose Arch. A quote beneath it, "Sometimes the best parts of the picture are the ones no one noticed at the time." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Those who know, know, and that's enough. Around the holidays, Marin stopped by unexpectedly. She hadn't shown up in over a year. She looked the same. Camera bag, quiet presence, soft smirk like she was always one shot ahead of the moment. Lindsay hugged her tightly. I just nodded. Marin looked around at the updated space and said, "You turned a whisper into a conversation." Lindsay smiled. "You handed us the mic." Marin pulled out a small package. Inside, an old roll of film developed and digitized. "Found this cleaning out my archive," she said. "It was from that weekend. Shots I never printed." Lindsay and I sat at her office desk and clicked through them later that evening. And in those frames, moments we didn't know had been captured. One of Evelyn's Rose Arch swaying in the wind. No people, just life. Another of me sitting in the study window, head bowed, hands clasped, and one of Lindsay standing at the edge of the garden, veil off, hair loose, staring at the sky like she was searching for something she hadn't named yet. We printed just one of them. The one with both of us, taken from behind, standing at the porch railing, staring out at the garden we rebuilt. She was leaning on me. I was holding a coffee mug. No faces, just connection. We hung it by the front entrance. No label, no title, because some pictures don't need introductions. They are the welcome. The years didn't creep in. They simply arrived one morning at a time. Lindsay's hair had more gray in it now. My hands weren't as steady with tools, but the Rose Arch still bloomed, defiant and graceful, like Evelyn's stubbornness never left the roots. We didn't talk about legacy often. We lived it, in small ways, in Sunday dinners, in repairs made without asking, in photos hung without plaques because they didn't need them. The gallery grew quieter in winter. Foot traffic slowed. Snow covered the street signs, but inside the warmth never left. There was always someone in a corner, crying softly in front of a print. Not because it was sad, because it reminded them of something they hadn't felt in years. One evening a teenager wandered in, hoodie, earbuds, barely looked up. He stopped in front of the Rose Arch mural, read the quote once, then again. I watched from the side as he slowly pulled out his phone, snapped a picture and whispered, "That's her." Then he left. Didn't buy anything. Didn't leave his name. But Lindsay looked at me and said, "That's why we keep the doors open." I spent most of my mornings at the gallery now, not as an owner, not as a face, just as part of the walls. People began calling me Mr. Walter, like I was a fixture, not famous, just familiar. I didn't mind. I answered questions about lighting, carried the folding chairs out front when school tours visited, adjusted frames when they hung a little off. Small things. The kind of things no one photographs, but those were the pieces that held everything up. Lindsay found a photo one day buried behind the register, one neither of us remembered taking. It was from her college graduation, just me in the crowd, clapping, out of focus. Partially cropped, but unmistakably me. She stared at it for a long time, then said, "You were always there, weren't you?" I smiled. The gallery didn't make us rich. It didn't get written up in national magazines. But it gave something to people we'll never meet. It gave them permission to feel, to remember, to heal. And for us, it gave back everything that was almost lost. One spring morning I stood beneath the rose arch again. Lindsay was on a ladder, stringing soft lights for an anniversary exhibit. She looked down at me and said, "Dad, hand me the clips." I passed them up, and as she worked she said, "You know we never needed them to frame us. We just needed to take the picture ourselves." I didn't say anything, just looked up and smiled. The sun was hitting the garden just right, and for once I wasn't thinking about what had been missed, only about what we'd found. There's a quiet kind of wealth that comes from being remembered the right way. Not as the man who gave speeches, not as the one who paid for everything, but as someone who stood still long enough for people to find themselves again. That's the role I ended up playing. Not in the photo, but always near the lens. The gallery was nearly 5 years old now. We didn't mark the anniversary with cake or signs, just opened the door like any other day and let the sunlight fall on the floorboards. Lindsay came in late that morning. Her hands were full, 2 bags, a box, a coffee she'd forgotten to sip. She looked overwhelmed, but when she saw me adjusting one of the lights near the back wall, she let out a breath and said, "Thank God you're here." Funny how simple those words can be, and how deep they land. She handed me the box. Inside were letters, not from customers, from contributors, people who had shared a photo, a memory, a wound, now writing back to say what happened after. One letter read, "You showed a photo of a man sitting alone at a table with 2 empty chairs. That was my father. After the exhibit, he reached out to me. We talked for the first time in 8 years. Thank you for giving me the courage." Another said, "I thought I was just a background character in my family, until I saw a photo of a man who smiled while no one looked. That photo looked like how I feel every day, and suddenly, I didn't feel alone." Lindsay and I read them all, didn't say much, didn't need to. Some stories don't need commentary, only eyes. That evening I asked her a question I hadn't asked in years. "What do you think Evelyn would have said about all this?" Lindsay thought for a moment, then said, "She'd say you turned hurt into a home." I chuckled softly. "She was never one for flattery." "No," Lindsay said, "but she was big on truth." The photo of Evelyn still hung in the gallery's office. Black and white, laughing, caught mid-step in the garden. It had never been displayed publicly. Lindsay always said it was ours, that some frames didn't need an audience, just a heartbeat. Marin had retired from wedding photography. She started teaching at a community college 2 towns over. She still visited once a year, usually unannounced. She'd drop off a small print or roll of film, give Lindsay a quiet nod, and sip coffee with me on the back porch. We didn't talk about the wedding anymore. We didn't need to. It had given birth to something better. And me, I kept showing up. Every day I could. I swept the floors, adjusted crooked frames, and stood silently beside guests who didn't know they were about to cry. Because some moments aren't captured with a shutter. Some are felt in the pause between one step and the next. I always believed in keeping things simple. A quiet porch, a well-swept path, a front door that never needed knocking. But life, I've learned, has its way of reminding you that simplicity is not the absence of chaos. It's the presence of something deeper beneath it all. The day I handed Lindsay the deed to the house, she cried. Not loud, not theatrical. She just held the papers, pressed them to her chest and whispered, "You're still teaching me how to show up." I didn't tell her it had been planned for years. Didn't tell her Evelyn and I agreed, long ago, that no matter what the world looked like, Lindsay would always have a place to return to. Not just a building, a home. She asked me if I'd move in with her to the upstairs room. I smiled, told her I'd think about it. Truth is, I already had my answer, but some things are best savored slowly, like the last page of a favorite book, or the final bloom of the season's roses. One evening, after closing the gallery, Lindsay and I sat on the porch, the same porch where I'd once watched them set up her wedding while quietly being erased from the frame. She leaned back, feet tucked beneath her, and asked, Do you think people ever really see their parents clearly? I looked out at the garden. No, not until they learn to see themselves first. She nodded like she finally understood something she hadn't known she was searching for. The garden was glowing under the string lights. The arch still stood strong. The air carried that familiar blend of honeysuckle and memory. A breeze passed through, rustling the chimes Evelyn had hung. It wasn't a haunting sound. It was home. The next day, I took down the old photo of Evelyn from the gallery office, wrapped it in cloth, carried it back to the house, hung it just inside the hallway, where the morning light touched it first. Lindsay walked by later, paused, and whispered, "Welcome home, Mom." I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need to be center stage. Because I had anchored it all where it mattered. Not in galleries, not in grand speeches, not in viral posts, but in the quiet trust between father and daughter, in the rebuilt arch, in the knowing nods of strangers who saw themselves in our story, and in every unseen frame that now hangs, silently, honestly, in the lives of those who almost forgot how much they still mattered. If this story moved you, do one small thing. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments, which city are you watching from? We'd love to hear your story too.